Thanks very much for staying with us. Time now for Eye on Africa with me, Georgia Calvin-Smith. Tonight, the ruling party's candidate in Nigeria's election seems to have an unassailable lead, but calls for a rerun continue to mount amidst concerns of vote rigging. Also, most of the countries with the top 10 maternal mortality rates in the world are found in sub-Saharan Africa. The problem goes beyond just healthcare. The deaths are often avoidable. And Gabon prepares to host the One Forest Summit to spotlight and share its know-how on protecting the ecosystems housed in its vast jungles. But first, Bola Tinubu, the candidate for Nigeria's ruling APC party, appears to have extended a lead in Nigeria's presidential election, even as opposition parties continued to call for the vote to be scrapped. The PDP and Labour Party say that failures in the polling technology masked massive vote manipulation. There were also reports of voter intimidation. Tuesday saw protests both for and against INEC, the Electoral Commission. It's been accused of, at worst, colluding in fraud and, at best, having run a badly organised voting exercise.
Our results. This is angry Nigerian women. Angry Nigerian women. We want our results, our real results. We have suffered enough.
We're also demanding that there are certain areas that we need rerun to be done. Yes. There are so much disenfranchisement because of the late arrival of materials, especially in Abuja.
It is what we have fought for, yes. It is what we have struggled for, yes. And it is what will be sustained. Yes. They should allow INEC to do their job, yes. Conclude the proceedings, yes. And announce the next president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria.
Well, as you can see, their feelings running high. International observers, though, have also noted a lack of transparency by INEC. Samuel Okoye joins us now with more. Sam, what is the latest? Any likelihood that this vote could be scrapped? It's been a busy day.
Really busy day. I mean, we've had press conferences here and there on both sides for and against the scrapping of these votes. But as it is now, I think the electoral body has announced 34 of 36 states. So we've gone past that stage where we should expect, where any of the parties will expect the stoppage of the announcement. But what is most likely to happen is that this matter will go to court. The two key opposition parties, that's the Labour Party and the People Democratic Party, are most likely to go to court to challenge the result of this election. They are quite a formidable force, I must say, because so far, of the 34 states announced so far, the ruling party has won in just 10 states, while the opposition has won in about 22 states. So you can see that the opposition has, the ruling party has become more of a minority. So it's that puts it in a slightly tighter corner going forward, actually.
Thanks very much, Samuel Okoye, there, getting us up to speed on that tense count in Nigeria following the weekend's election. Now, a French court has dismissed a case brought by environmental campaigners against Total Energies for an oil project in Uganda and Tanzania. 2 French and 4 Ugandan NGOs had argued that the building of the East African crude oil pipeline failed to adhere to a duty of vigilance to avoid grave harm to the environment. The court had ruled that the case was inadmissible as accounts submitted to it by the plaintiffs were substantially different from those formerly presented to Total Energies in 2019 when the case was initiated. 2 South Africans detained in an Equatorial Guinean prison for over 2 weeks still face no formal charges despite Pretoria's attempts to negotiate their release. They were arrested after the vice president of Equatorial Guinea's luxury yacht was seized in Cape Town after he lost a court case for wrongfully imprisoning a South African businessman. The boat was released last Friday, but the prisoners remain in detention. Nadine Thoreau has been speaking to their families.
In Cape Town, South Africa, the super yacht sailed through a diplomatic storm. It's worth around 16.5 million euros and is one of 3 registered to the Equatorial Guinean Ministry of Defence. It was used by Equatorial Guinea's Vice President, Theodorin Nguema Obiang. The yachts and Theodorin's 2 South African mansions were seized because he owes Daniel van Rensburg more than €2.2 million in damages. That's because a decade ago, Theodorin wrongly imprisoned Daniel for almost 500 days after an airline deal with his uncle failed. The torture and assault Daniel survived in the notorious Black Beach prison still haunts him.
The worst part was the rape and abuse of the women and the children. To me, there's nothing worse in the world than that, and there's nothing you can do about it.
His recent court victory was overshadowed by the subsequent arrest of 2 other South Africans in Equatorial Guinea. Engineers Peter Huxham and Frick Potgieter were accused of smuggling drugs shortly after Theodorin's boat was seized.
Never in my life. It's not mine.
3 weeks later, and they still haven't been charged. Their families are terrified.
We don't even know if they're alive. And, as I said to the ambassador, all we need is I just need a photograph for him just to pick up the phone and say, hello, cats.
The men were arrested after Theodorin threatened to retaliate against South Africa. The editor of this newspaper says the arrests are no coincidence.
On doit obliger à Theodorin de respecter la loi.
Theodorin must be forced to respect the law, and the South African government must be forced to break off relations with Guinea because they've kidnapped people. They were falsely accused to put pressure on South Africa to release the boat.
The Blue Shadow was just released. It left Cape Town last week, but the South African prisoners in Equatorial Guinea have still not seen a judge.
A report from the UN has laid bare huge regional disparities in maternal death rates. The problem touches every region in the world, but poorer countries and those affected by conflict are particularly vulnerable. In 2020, sub-Saharan Africa's maternal mortality rate was 136 times that of Australia and New Zealand, where MMR was lowest. South Sudan has the highest numbers, followed by Chad and Nigeria. 9 out of the 10 following countries with the highest numbers are all in sub-Saharan Africa. I'm joined now by Ms. Argentina Matavel, who's the director for West and Central Africa for the UN's Population Fund. Thank you so much for speaking to us. Now, why are so many women dying of childbirth in sub-Saharan Africa?
We are in a region that is beset by multi-layered crisis, which further weaken an already poor health system, in fact. And then there's the social norms, social gender norms, which determine that women and girls have no agency over their bodies, over decision of when or if they want to have children. They have no access to family planning, for example, that would reduce the risk of them dying, giving birth, since they would have more child spacing. But it's also the quality of care. It's proven, and UNFPA trains many midwives around the world, but we don't have enough skilled midwives to put at primary health care, where closer to the women, as opposed to having women have to travel miles and miles to get to a hospital in a district level for quality care when an emergency hits.
Considering the scale of the problem in sub-Saharan Africa, is this enough of a priority amongst policymakers, in your opinion?
Well, we've seen many laws and policies passed, even resolutions by the African Union and many countries passing those laws. The challenge is that there's really poor implementation of those laws, and there is poor allocations of budgets. So we need a more deliberate wheel, so per se, followed by better allocations to the issues of women's health. And it's clear that unless we educate girls, we will continue following this cycle of poverty, of women not having agency over whether they decide to have children or not, and when and how many. But it's also the humanitarian crisis. We have, for example, just in West Africa and Central Africa, a total of 7 or 8 protracted humanitarian crises that have been going on for many, many years. And in those areas, there's hardly any health facility with all the necessary services, including family planning for women who are on the run, who are already in distress.
Argentina, Matavel, thank you very much for giving us a bit of an insight into this problem. We wish you the very best with your work in trying to raise awareness and tackle the issue of maternal mortality rates in sub-Saharan Africa.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Well, French President Emmanuel Macron will be in Gabon on Wednesday for the start of a 4-country tour of Central Africa and the start of a summit on how better to protect the world's forests. Gabon is in the Congo Basin, one of the world's major tropical forests, and it's gone further than many of its neighbours in trying to protect them. Indira Eteng has more.
Gabon's jungle stretches as far as the eyes can see. Thousands of hectares covering more than 80% of the territory. The vast forests are the center of discussions about the diversification of the Gabonese economy. The country is trying to prepare for the post-oil era. In the region of Moanda lies a forest concession under sustainable management.
We should be able to promote controlled felling, which allows us to protect not only the resources, but also the workers and the environment.
Here, the chopping of wood has been subject to forest regulations since 2001. They help preserve ecosystems and prevent climate change while limiting the dependence on oil. The exportation of raw logs was banned a decade ago. Since then, more timber resources aimed for industrial use have been managed sustainably. That's led to the creation of a lucrative market for luxury furniture made from a variety of rare species.
This has made it possible for us to set up an industry with companies that use nearly 1 million cubic meters of wood per year. Today we have better control of our production. We can better trace our forest concessions.
About 20,000 jobs have been created both directly and indirectly by the model. Authorities say Libreville's special economic zone represents 40% of the country's exports. But not everyone's convinced about the transparency of the process.
Article 290 of the Forest Code stipulates that the administration is required to produce an annual report on the state of forests. Over 20 years after the law came into force, we're still waiting for its first report.
Most of the country's forests, though abundant, are threatened by overexploitation. There'll be more examination of how better to preserve tropical forests at the One Forest Summit due to be held in Gabon on the 1st and 2nd of March.
Well, that's it for Eye on Africa. Thanks for joining us. Do so again. Take care.
Versailles, Mont Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius and France harbours many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24. Discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs. Meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.